Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here, Brad. Brad, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I reached out to you to talk about the JFK topic because I saw you did some work on it. Can you take me down the journey that is the JFK topic for you? Like, when did you get started? Why did you write a book on it?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. It was an honor to be contacted by you. The Kennedy thing, I initially started off in high school. I was studying the murder of John Lennon. And my dad was in the Air Force. He was a flight line supervisor. And my dad had always reinforced to me, you'd be amazed what you can do with a telephone. I never put much stock in that till I started interviewing people related to the John Lennon shooting, including the doctor who did open cardiac massage. He's holding this Beatles heart in his hand. And then suddenly in 1992, I took this right-hand turn and ended up on the Kennedy matter. And I started off by reading the Warren Report. I thought, well, that's probably the best place to start. And then I went to Rush to Judgment because I'd heard that that was sort of the defense brief, sort of the antithesis of the Warren Report. From there, I went to 6 Seconds in Dallas, which is incredibly hard to get your hands on, but I managed to do that. And I started calling Dealey Plaza eyewitness witnesses. Well, let me back up. The first eyewitness that I got on the phone was completely by accident. I called what was then the JFK Assassination Information Center in Dallas, which was defunct shortly thereafter. But I called there because I wanted a print of the Mormon photo, because I was looking at the Mormon photo and I thought, you know, if there is another gun involved, it's in this picture. It's got to be in this picture somewhere. I'd like to get a really good quality print of this instead of something cut out of Newsweek or whatever. And they said, well, we can't help you with that. You need to call Gary Mack over at KXAS in Fort Worth. So I called Gary Mack, who I knew who he was because he'd made an appearance in The Men Who Killed Kennedy, as you know. And I get Mr. Mack on the phone, and he says, well, we can't get you the Mormon photo because of what it may or may not contain. There's some possible litigation going on. If you just want pictures, why don't you call Phil Willis over in Arlington? Okay, so I thought, well, this is going to be a researcher. This is going to be a dude who deals in just in photos, something. And I get this kind of crotchety old guy on the phone, and he keeps talking about, I took the last picture of Kennedy and Johnson in the same frame. In my photos, you can see X, Y, Z, and this, that, and the other. And suddenly I realized this man watched the President of the United States be murdered in broad daylight. And I got him on the phone completely by happenstance. And I got off the phone there, and I did order he wanted $100 for slides, a set of 12 slides, 35 millimeter, which I did pay that. And it was well worth it. But I hung up from that and I thought, wow, I wonder what I could do if I actually tried. So I started picking names out of the Warren Commission report: Charles Brim, Ike Alkins, people like that, Bill and Gail Newman. And they were listed, ironically enough, they were listed in Dallas information. In those days, you used to dial 214-555-1212, and it would get you. Now it's all different, I'm sure, with phones. But you know, I get Ike Alkins on the phone, who was a Warren supporter, Charles Brim, Warren supporter, Bill and Gail Newman, not warrant supporters, as you probably know from Mr. Law. Actually, when I first met Bill Law, actually, he was with Bill Newman.
He's a
That was
great
in
guy.
Dallas.
William Law's a great guy.
He is. And I've known him since I met him in 1996. And it was funny during his interview with you, he kept talking about these conference things that I was actually invited, I believe, to go to the deal where he talked about going to lunch at the Newman's house in Mesquite, but I had a previous engagement that noon, so I didn't get to go. But I ended up with this guy on the phone, and I'm not going to give his name because I believe he's still alive. But he tells me that he heard upwards of 8, 10, maybe 11 shots. So most people are saying 2 to 3 shots, maybe 4. And now all of a sudden I've got 11. And I thought, wow, there's going to be no way to get to the bottom of this unless I get some good witnesses. And not that those folks aren't good witnesses who thoroughly believe what they're saying. Every one of them, I believe, was saying what they believe, right, wrong, or indifferent. They believe what they're saying. But I thought, well, who would that be? Doctors are trained observers. They're trained to be cool under pressure. So the first one I called was Robert Shaw, who was the thoracic surgeon who worked on Governor Conway. And I get him on the phone, and one of the very first things he says, and I've got all this on tape. I worry that I need to get these switched to digital before the iron oxide falls off the tape. It's been 30 years. But I get him on the phone and he says, I never believed the single bullet theory. Well, as you know, and as has been pointed out in so many interviews that you've done, without the single bullet theory, you've got nothing. You've got no case against Oswald, really. I mean, he could have been shooting, but you have to have another gun if you have no single bullet theory. So I decided the first one that I would try would be Ron Jones. Dr. Ron Jones had made some very interesting remarks in Best Evidence, which I'd read around that time, and some of the books, High Treason, High Treason Volume 2, not High Treason also. But he'd made some interesting remarks, and I called him up, and he actually answered his own phone. He didn't have a secretary answer. He answered his own phone. I called him at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas. And I said, well, I'm a 17-year-old kid, and I'm doing a term paper, which I was. I'd talked my government teacher into letting me write about that for a term paper. And would you mind helping me out? You got something that you went like this?
Oh, no, I was moving my microphone.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought it was. I guess
comfy.
I'm used to doing college things where, hey.
Well, you're talking to me like I'm a college student. I'm basically learning. I mean, that's what's interesting to me is like the stories behind this. I mean, we know, like, I've reached out to some of the people who were the secondary parts of the Warren Commission, the people that were a bunch of lawyers that are still alive. A lot of the obviously original members are dead, but the people that helped with, and you're looking at it like, okay, this is suspicious that, first of all, they're all lawyers. And it's like, of course, they're going to write it in legal speak. And if you read the Warren Commission, it doesn't matter if you agree with it or not. It's in legal speak. I mean,
it's difficult when you're 17 years old.
Yeah.
But I get Ron Jones on the phone, and he says, I've had several interviews lately that that the people misrepresented who they were. And I said, well, I'm happy to give you reference, because the doctor who delivered me in 1975 was still practicing medicine. And I knew that the AMA put out a series of books which listed every physician in the country. So I could give them that information. They could verify it in the book, and they could call him. He says, yeah, let me transfer you to my secretary. You give your reference and call me back tomorrow about the same time. I said, okay, cool. So gave the secretary the information, and I called back the second day, and I believe the secretary did answer that day. And I said, can I talk to Dr. Jones? And they said, yes, here you go. And here's Ron Jones on the phone, who is one of the best interviews I've ever had. This was June of 1992. And I said, well, I hope I passed the background check. And he said, yeah, my secretary did verify, and you're exactly who you say you are. You have to be in high school with the date that the doctor gave us. So I got about a 30 to 45-minute interview out of him, in which he would say things like the throat wound was compatible with an entrance in the throat. The head wound was compatible with a shot from the front. He never would categorically say, this came from the front, or this came from wherever. His big term is it's compatible, or he would say it's not incompatible. And I got a lot of good stuff from him that I walked away from that feeling like, okay, he was clearly shot from the front. If you read between the lines and get rid of the compatible part, what he's telling me is he believes he's shot from the front. Now, around this same time, in April of '92, Charles Crenshaw came out with his first book, Conspiracy of Silence. I made contact with Dr. Crenshaw because he had taken such a beating in the Journal of the American Medical Association, which my doctor had given me. And it seemed to be that all the physicians that were interviewed for 2020, for instance, interviewed Charles Baxter. And he says, Dr. Crenshaw has no basis to make these claims that Kennedy was shot from the front. So I looked in a Fort Worth phone book at the library, and this is pre-internet. This is old school stuff here. And there's a C.A. Crenshaw, and I knew his middle name was Andrew. So I called C.A. Crenshaw at 217 Rivercrest in Dallas, or in Fort Worth. He's deceased now, is why I'm giving that out. But I get his wife. And I said, I really would like to talk to Dr. Crenshaw because I felt like this guy's really just taking this huge pummeling in the media. He's got to feel like no one believes him. And I know I'm nobody. I'm this 17-year-old kid that doesn't amount to a hill of beans to this guy. But I'm going to call and at least voice some support. And Susan says, I will give him the message, and I believe you will be hearing from him. And a few hours later, the phone rings, and I'm 17. My mom answers it, and I don't know if you've ever heard Dr. Crenshaw's voice, but it was very deep. Very, oh, is Brad there? My mom said it sounded like God calling.
I've seen the video of him where he talks about the front shot. It's like the very exclusive interview.
Yeah. Well, was that the one with Geraldo?
I don't remember if it's Geraldo. It's in the new Oliver Stone film.
Okay. Yeah, he did an interview on a show called Now It Can Be Told with Geraldo Rivera's people, and he was on 2020 and some other shows. And I get Dr. Crenshaw on the phone, and I said, I just really believe what you're saying. I mean, you have no motive. I mean, the guy's been in medicine forever. He's got to have a few bucks in the bank. He's not just out to sell a book. He's got something to say. So from there, and Dr. Crenshaw over the course of the years became actually quite a good friend. We would just call up and chat. He would, on occasion when I got to college, he would send me a newspaper clipping that he thought that I might find interesting. He would, just strange things like that. Crenshaw kind of came into the fold from there. Dr. McClelland, I called McClelland's office, and he says, I really am not going to have time to do an interview at the office. Here's my home phone number. So that night I called his home phone number, and the other day I'd responded to some comment on a YouTube thing about McClelland. And this guy responded to me saying, well, McClelland was a conspiracy theorist. And I kind of took issue with that, because you want to call me a conspiracy theorist, okay. You want to call you a conspiracy theorist, okay. Why? Because neither one of us were there. These guys were actually in the room. And I think when you've got knowledge, firsthand knowledge, that moves you out of being a theorist. At least in my mind, that's how I reasoned it out.
Well, I mean, even look at Cyril Wecht and look at Gary Aguilar, who have medical degrees and are still practicing medicine. People call them, oh, they're doing this for attention. They're conspiracy theorists. It's like you have everything to lose when you have a business and you're running a profession. They're not doing it for their health. They're not doing it for fun. Clint Hill can go write another book. That's explainable. But when you have people that are still practicing in their career and trying to make a medical profession, do you think that's going to help on their record being labeled as that, unless they didn't strongly believe it?
No, and virtually everybody that I contacted in 1992, 93, 94, because my research went in two different phases, which I'll cover, but they were all still practicing. Most of them had professorships at UT Southwestern Medical School at Dallas, which is, of course, the school that's right there at Parkland. And you're right. I mean, that could have, there could have been hearings and boards and all kinds of people saying, you have no business talking about this. We're going to take away your tenure and you're out the door, bud. And nobody did that. One of the things that I've got that I thought I would just throw out there is McClelland in particular. I interviewed him on November 10th, 1992. He put it very succinctly. He saw the warrant commission, or he saw the Zapruder film in 1969. He was part of the Clay Shaw trial, as you know. But he said to me, the bullet hit him from the front and hit him tangentially in the side of the head, meaning, for those who maybe aren't geometry people, tangentially means just basically grazed the side of his head. If the rifle being fired had been 3 to 5 minutes of angle off, he would have missed. But he says he was hit tangentially in the side of the head. It entered probably somewhere near the front of that wound that I saw and blew out part of the skull, and then continued out the back of the head at the posterior end of that wound. Well, that means it's an elliptical wound like this, that there's no distinct entrance and there's no distinct exit. Now, Crenshaw in his book, and I spent a lot of time with Crenshaw in Dallas and Fort Worth, and Crenshaw says that he saw an entry wound in this area. Now, right, wrong, or indifferent, one thing about Charles Crenshaw and every single one of these guys that I met, and even on the phone, you could tell they believe what they're saying. Whether they're incorrect or not, you can argue. But these guys believed what they were saying. And, they really did take part in some things that put them in the right places. McClelland in particular, when Perry's doing the tracheotomy, he gets to Parkland, he's blue. They decide he's trying to breathe. Jim Carrico throws down an endotracheal tube down his throat. They find that that's not working. So Perry elects to do a tracheotomy. He tells McClelland, because there's Perry on this side, which I think we're reversed here. Perry's on the left side. Charles Baxter's on the right side. McClelland is at the top of the head. McClelland is given a retractor. He holds the retractor and he basically just stands there while they do the cutting on the trachea and get the tube inserted and all that. And what he told me was what I was doing didn't take any particular amount of attention. I was free to look at that injury as much as I wanted to. And you will see this drawing online if you can make this out. Okay, you've seen this probably with this bit up here made out to me.
A lot of witnesses have drawn that exact same location in the back of the skull.
I've got a series of drawings from Crenshaw.
It's where we get the Harper fragment, the occipital bone.
Yeah, Dr. Gerald Notabone, that's another one that I interviewed, that he was adamant that that was an occipital bone. Notabone was the guy that, or Notabaum, I guess I'm saying it incorrectly. He saw the wound at, or he saw the fragment rather at, I believe it was Methodist Hospital. But he's saying that's occipital bone. Well, anybody that knows anything about skull anatomy knows that occipital bone is the triangular shaped, you know, thing back here. And McClellan actually described to me that, well, he's holding what, like I said, he called it the idiot stick, not to take away from physicians who are doing that at this very moment. But he's holding this, and the cerebellum, which basically, if you draw a line between the holes in your ear, basically what's below that is going to be cerebellum. And the cerebellum fell out on the table. That places that wound definitively to me. It's not up here. It's not over here. When that bit of brain tissue is involved, that outlines the whole thing.
Well, did any of the guys you interviewed, did they talk about when they were at Parkland that, I mean, if you're placing a trach tube because he's blue in the face and he looks like he's trying to breathe, you wouldn't do that if you go by the Zapruder film where the whole right side of his head explodes. It looked like it took out like a chunk of his eye, basically, if you're watching the Zapruder film and you're a novice, but then you start learning deeper into it. I mean, they were making reports about it saying that he was still alive, and I guess they're alive until they pronounce you dead. But you get into the hospital, it's like if his whole right side of his head is basically gone from a bullet, you're not going to try and place a trach tube in him.
Well, he actually, his cardiac activity did not cease until 12:52. He was shot at 12:30. He arrives at Parkland about 12:35. He's blue, which means he's trying to breathe. Basically, the heart is on autopilot at that point. So they decide what they have to do is get him breathe. They call it the ABCs of trauma: airway, breathing, and circulation. But they did that. Cardiology shows up. They connect him to an electrocardiogram. He does have some random electrical activity in the heart, which they're still trying, because now once that ceases, and they did do the defibrillation, but once that ceases, once the heart is electrically dead, the person is dead. So they did that. He did have that cardiac activity going on, but again, well, a lot of times, and I was a police officer for 17 years, and I've been to a lot of shootings where it was clear the person was going to die, but for whatever reason they were still breathing. You know, you've got separate systems. You know, your brain is one thing, your heart is another, your lungs are connected to the heart, and if that's still going, you're obligated to keep going. You're obligated to do everything you can for this person that is in bad shape. But yeah, they did indicate that there was, you know, or there were rather, to be grammatically correct, signs of life. He died at 12:52. However, being Catholic, they knew the importance of the last rites. Now, the priest, Father Huber, and I believe there was another one named Thompson. I may be incorrect on that last name. They were summoned very early when Kennedy got to the hospital, but with city traffic and wading their way through the crowded Parkland, it took them a while to get there. They got there a couple minutes after he died. They went ahead and did the last rites. Father Huber actually gave an interview where he said he was certain that the soul was still with the body. Interestingly enough, I don't know how how one measures that. But that's why he wasn't declared dead until 1300, 1 o'clock, was because even though he'd been dead 8 minutes, they wanted for the family to have the last rites given. So that played into it as well. That and they elected Kemp Clark, the neurosurgeon, who I've got an item on him that is maybe not tremendously well known, but they elected to have him be the one to declare him as deceased because it was a neurological injury. Now the thing about Kemp Clark, he testified to the Warren Commission in '64. I don't believe he testified to the House Assassinations Committee. I may be incorrect on that. But he very tight-lipped individual. I couldn't get a hold of him. I tried calling, I tried sending letters, I tried everything but going to his house. And I only didn't go to his house because I didn't have his address. I would have done it in those days. But you know, there was this guy in 1992, or not, no, I'm sorry, I was in college, so it would have been 1994, named David Narrow, who was a steel worker out of Memphis. And David Narrow somehow managed to get Kemp Clark on the phone. Now, this is the first time that Kemp Clark has spoken to anyone other than the Warren Commission that I am aware of. And this is a big deal. He didn't tape it, so a lot of people doubt it. Now, I've interviewed David Narrow at length, and I think he's legitimately telling the truth, that Kemp Clark in 1994 said, in my view, he was shot from the front, and that was an exit wound in the back of the skull. And that's what I got out of a lot of physicians. Kenneth Sawyer, who was a resident, he's actually, I'm in Kansas, and he went to the University of Kansas, KU Med Center, which I'm not real proud of as a native Kansan. Sawyer actually gave several statements over the years in the 60s and 70s, and even appeared on Nova in 1998, where with McClellan and Peters and these guys, and said, there's something wrong with those autopsy photos. They're not correct. Well, by the time I get a hold of Ken Sawyer, he has redrawn the injury. He's taken the McClellan drawing and moved it up. And it says this shows the back of the head, and the injury was temporal parietal, which, as you know, when a doctor's describing an injury of bone, they a lot of times will group those names together. So he's placing that injury where? Exactly where the autopsy places it. And so he changed his mind somewhere after the Nova interview, much like Pepper Jenkins. Pepper Jenkins was one that I called. He was the head of anesthesiologist after McClellan did the idiot stick, as he called it, and he stepped out of the way. Pepper Jenkins steps to the head of the table. During this time, Jackie Kennedy comes up to him and gives him, she's holding something in her hand like this, and she hands him something about baseball size, and it was a piece of his brain. And Dr. Jenkins says, well, thank you very much, ma'am. Waits till she goes back out the emergency room door, and then he drops it in the kick bucket, because obviously it's not going to be anything that is reusable, that you can reattach. Now, I got Pepper Jenkins on the phone in August of 1992, and again with the Warren report. You know, there's an amazing amount of stuff in this book that shoots down the very thesis. You're probably aware of that there's a lot of stuff in here that actually shoots down the final conclusion of the Warren Commission report. And one of them is on page 530. This is a letter from Pepper Jenkins excuse me, M.T. Jenkins, MD, Professor and Chairman, Department of Anesthesiologist, to Mr. J.C. Price, Administrator of Parkland Hospital. Statement concerning resuscitative efforts on President Kennedy. This is why I called Pepper Jenkins. And I said, you made a statement on page 2 of your letter to Administrator Price that is very intriguing. And he kind of sighed and he says, what was that? He knows what's coming. He knows. But the statement, and this is word for word. Now, yeah, like I said, I'm on page 530. This is page 2 of his report. There's only one, where there are 2 paragraphs on this page. This is in the top paragraph, second sentence. There was a great laceration on the right side of the head, temporal and occipital, causing a great defect to the skull plate, so that there was a herniation and laceration of a great area of the brain, even to the extent that the cerebellum protruded from the wound. There were also fragmented sections of the brain on the drapes of the emergency room cart. I read that to him. What do I get? I didn't write that in the letter to Price. I said, sir, I'm looking at it on page 530 of the Warren report. How, I mean, this isn't even out of the exhibits section. It made the report. You know, in the exhibits, I believe it's in volume 6, I believe, of the exhibits. But I'm looking at the report itself. It was important enough that they included it. And he says, I didn't write that. So I mailed him a copy. Well, what did I get? Nothing. You know, just outright, and he knew better. I could tell by the tone of his voice that he knew better. He knew that he'd written that. But I'm a 17-year-old kid, maybe 18 by that time. No, I was 17 at that time. So he feels like he's going to say whatever he thinks, and I'm just going to take it at face value. Other guys, Don Curtis was one that Don Curtis took part in the cut downs. When he got into the emergency room, they get the trach done, they insert chest tubes, which the chest tubes, I don't know if you're familiar with all the procedures that were done. The chest tubes were there because he had some air, and they were also worried about blood from the throat wound going down into the chest, causing a tension pneumothorax, which is where the lung is actually compressed to where it doesn't function properly. They do the chest tubes, and they put him in what's called the Trendelin position, which is where they drop the head about 16 degrees. They then, on both arms, which they've got his arms extended out on arm boards from the gurney, and they've got his ankles. His ankles are elevated. They then cut into blood vessels in each extremity and start dumping fluids in. And ironically enough, Pepper Jenkins, as a footnote, Pepper Jenkins was one of the guys that helped come up with LR, lactated ringers solution, which is basically salt water with some electrolytes in it. But Curtis, I sent him, when I said my research consisted of 2 segments, the first segment was in 92, 93, I was calling these people and I recorded everything. In 94, I became intrigued by the McClellan drawing, because what did he write? He writes, Brad, this is dated January 24th, 1994. Brad, the drawing below is an exact copy in regard to location and dimensions of the drawing I made for Josiah Thompson in 1966. Best wishes, Robert M. McClellan, MD. I don't know what he means by in regard to location and dimension. It's worded kind of funny. So I think he means it's a Xerox, but I don't know what he's saying, but I'm trying to accurately represent what he said here. But I decided to send this to McClellan to get his take on it. Did you, because this is out of 6 seconds in Dallas, and the original caption on the drawing says a pictorial representation of President Kennedy's head wound as described by Dr. Robert McClellan of Parkland Hospital. Well, now, did he do the drawing or did he not? That's what prompted the letter to McClellan. When I get that back, I start sending that drawing to everybody I've got an address for, which by that time I'd interviewed tons of Parkland doctors, been told no by several, not as many as you would guess, but been told no interview by several. But that was the second phase, that I would send the drawing to these folks and say, okay, we've discussed this on the phone. Is this what we're talking about? And I got some very nice responses. Ron Jones says, yeah, that's about right. Probably not with as defined edges as is depicted in the drawing, but yeah, that's fairly accurate. Dr. Crenshaw did his own drawing. One letter that I absolutely love is a handwritten letter that was done on the back of the drawing that I sent by Jackie Hunt, who was the only female. Dr. Crenshaw and I compiled a list of everybody that was present in trauma room 1 that we could identify in 1992. And he was insistent that on the list, and I put their capacities, he was insistent that I listed her as the only female MD in the room. So I'm throwing that out there because it was so important to him. But on the back of this letter, or on the back of this drawing, she writes, well, Jackie Hunt had testified to the Warren Commission. She said that there was a head wound in the back. She didn't speak to anybody else until about 1972. She spoke to the Boston Globe. And the Boston Globe interview consists of her saying the drawing, or she said that the wound was somewhere on the posterior side of the head. So I get this great handwritten drawing, or handwritten letter, one of the very few handwritten letters I've got from a Parkland doctor. And she said the drawing agrees with my original statement somewhere on the right posterior side of the head, and that is still my statement. So you add all this up, and what do you got? Now, I don't know how much you know about ballistics. Most people know enough to know that if you fire a bullet, you don't get a hole this big. You don't get a hole this big, unless you're shooting a 50 caliber or something. If you've got a hole this big in the back of somebody's head, it's pretty obvious that is an exit wound. Ron Jones, interestingly enough, during the first interview that I did with him, he says, you know, my initial impression was that he had been out shaking hands, because he says, you've got to remember, we had no history of anything. We didn't know how he'd been shot, when he'd been shot, where he'd been shot, anything. He was just there. And my impression was that he'd been out perhaps shaking hands with well-wishers at the airport. Somebody walks up with a handgun, kind of leans back and fires upward, and it went in the throat. And he says it either then went out directly this way, or perhaps it struck a vertebrae and was diverted upward. Now, this is the impression of the physician. He's trying to think of one bullet taking care of this whole thing. Well, flash forward to September 1975. That was the scenario that Squeaky Fromm used when she tried to kill President Ford. She had a Colt 1911, and she tried to fire upwards and hit him in the head. But fortunately for Mr. Ford and the country, because the country certainly didn't need an assassination right after Watergate, Squeaky Fromm had failed to chamber the round. So she didn't know what she was doing. It's the only reason Joe Ford lived to be as old as he did. But these guys are seeing these wounds and they're trying to kind of put it together, but at the same time, they don't have time to really analyze this. They know that Earl Rose the pathologist, is extraordinarily qualified, nationally recognized. He's going to be the one doing the autopsy. So they think, well, we don't have to ascertain anything. Dr. Rose will do that.
That's the guy who
Well,
said Texas state law that he's supposed to be doing the autopsy, right?
that's correct. Exactly right. He and Justice of the Peace Theron Ward showed up right after Kennedy was declared dead. Well, by that time, the Secret Service had procured a casket from the O'Neill Funeral Home, and they were loading him up. They were getting the hell out of there. You know?
Did any of the doctors go in depth of why that they needed to go so fast?
Why the Secret Service went so fast?
Yeah, why did the Secret Service apparently flash guns? Why? I've heard people mention that was because Jackie Kennedy wanted the body back home or something. A lot of things that just don't make sense, but that's like people on the conspiracy side will also use that. Like, that's how you know they're part of it. And I'm like, I don't know. I would have to be in that room to see how it was going down. I could see that,
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
well, I mean, I could see it from both angles on it. It's just a weird thing, especially if you're looking for immediate medical attention, but you also have people that are, performing an autopsy on them already, that necessarily you could have a bunch of qualified, super qualified people to work on the president, not even like an hour or 2 hours away, that could easily get there. And I get it's the pace of the time. You have to hurry up and get this done. But I mean, even the most professional guy, the Texas Earl Rose, you have him going like, hey, this is Texas state law for me to work on it. But then they're just trying to rush the body out of there.
Because at the time, there was no federal law on killing a president. It was a Texas state law. It was treated like any other homicide. The problem was from the Secret Service angle, and I'm not saying that I agree with this, but I can kind of understand it. Lyndon Johnson makes it very clear to his head guy, Rufus Youngblood, that he is not leaving Dallas without Mrs. Kennedy. Okay, well, the Secret Service, to quote a line that was used on Air Force One that morning when Kennedy saw the wanted for treason thing, or not wanted for treason, but welcome Mr. Kennedy to Dallas, the newspaper ad. He was looking at that and he says, well, we're really going into Indian country today. And the Secret Service viewed themselves very much in Indian territory, nothing against Native Americans. I'm just using the phrase. But President Johnson, they feel that they need to get him back to the safety of the White House. He's not leaving without Jackie. Jackie's not leaving without the body. So the Secret Service has a security issue. But unfortunately, that security issue puts them at odds with the Texas state law. They make it clear that they are leaving. I asked Earl Rose this specifically. What about guns? And Earl Rose says, I never saw any guns, but there was certainly an implication. We all knew that they were armed. Other people, Dr. Crenshaw in his book talks about a Secret Service agent with a rifle being in the emergency room area right outside of Trauma Room 1, which I just read yesterday. They're tearing down the original Parkland Hospital, which I hate to see that. But apparently this Secret Service agent was standing guard at the door of Trauma Room 1, and somebody tried to go in. This agent didn't feel that this person had business there, and I doubt that it was George Hickey. I hope not, because George Hickey's certainly been blamed for a lot of other stuff that he didn't do. But somebody with a rifle, wham! And Dr. Crenshaw says in his book, and a lot of people dispute his book. I knew the man. He believed what he was saying, whether he was right or wrong. But he said he knew when the guy got hit that that the jaw was busted. Now you've got that going on right outside the room. And by this time, when Kennedy died, these doctors began to sort of filter out because they wanted to give Jackie a moment to sort of, have her moment to say goodbye. So these doctors are all kind of hanging around outside, kind of thinking, man, can you believe what we just went through? And Secret Service at that point, I doubt, having been in law enforcement and having been in some rather high tense and situations, you don't necessarily make it a secret that you're heavily armed. But for them to do that, going up against a group of unarmed doctors who, they're running what's called the Knife and Gun Club, which was the Parkland Emergency Department. They were sort of informally known as the Knife and Gun Club. And these agents are blatant enough that whether they flashed guns or not, Crenshaw said he saw them. He's the only one that I ran into that really definitely commented that he saw firearms. But when a guy's standing there with an AR-15 or whatever it happened, I believe it was an AR-15, that probably the same one that was produced during the shooting by George Hickey. There's an implied threat, and these guys, Earl Rose says, we're going to the morgue. I've got to uphold Texas state law.
Why did you ask him about why he was so 100% of trying to go by the state law? I figured at this point, Mr. Kennedy's wife, Jackie's there. You're causing a little bit more heartbreak by keeping this going on, even if you want to pronounce him dead. I mean, unless he was looking for, like, I was the doctor that pronounced Kennedy dead or something on his record, but I don't see that.
No, actually, it was Clark that pronounced him dead. But it would have been Rose that signed the autopsy report. And I believe that Earl Rose, if you're a pathologist and someone murders me in your jurisdiction and the body gets away somehow, someone steals my body, somebody loses it in the morgue, whatever, there's probably going to be some ramifications for you. That Texas State Board of Pathology is going to say, hey, we have this law for a reason. This is the President of the United States. This is an incredibly important case. What the hell happened that you don't have a report for us? You should have done that report. And I think it was more a thing of a CYA thing.
Cover your ass.
Than a thing of, I was the guy that did the autopsy. Earl Rose was a very modest, very soft-spoken individual. And visiting with him, I had no doubt that he was eminently more qualified than Humes, Boswell, or Fink. And I've spoken to both Humes and Boswell, and neither one of those two guys left a great amount of confidence in me. Dr. Aguilar has a lot more experience interviewing those two guys. I attempted some interviews with those guys, but they both made it pretty clear. Dr. Humes was happy to lecture me, but he didn't really want to answer any questions. But I feel that Dr. Rose was an obstacle to the Secret Service. The Secret Service is their job. They've just dropped the ball, and I'm not blaming Clint Hill or anybody else, but on their watch, somehow a president just died. The new president is refusing to leave without the widow, but yet we've got to get him back to the safety of the White House. So I can see both sides of it, but I still believe that autopsy should have been done in Dallas County. And I am sure, had that autopsy been done in Dallas County, that it would have been that we might not even be talking about this today.
The family physician was there, wasn't he?
George Berkeley, yes.
I'm trying to think because I know some of the doctors talked about they couldn't account for every single person that was in that room. And I can understand that you're under some pressure. You're focused on the body, not everyone trampling around each other. But I know I saw Berkeley that he was involved in both. He was there every moment when Kennedy was, or not every moment, but he was at both hospitals when Kennedy was being looked
Yeah,
at.
presidents to this day travel with physicians. In fact, Air Force One has an operating room on it. But it didn't in those days. But George Berkeley was several vehicles back from the president. Now, Jim Carrico had heard a rumor that President Kennedy had Addison's disease.
Yeah.
And he went ahead and shot him full of steroids, knowing it's not going to hurt anything, even if the rumor is incorrect. But George Berkeley arrives several minutes after Kennedy after the treatment had begun, and says, "You need to give him these steroids." And they said, "Don't worry about it. It's already been taken care of." George Berkeley is the one that signed the death certificate. The death certificate is an interesting document in that it says that the back wound was at the level of the fourth thoracic vertebrae. Fourth thoracic is we're looking at about this far lower than what is described, because the autopsy report describes that wound as being above the scapula on the right side.
Well, that's your boy Arlen Specter. Arlen Specter came in there and was like, "Hey, let's just adjust it." Arlen Specter is the one that did that.
Yeah. You look at the clothing, which I'm sure you've seen. The Secret Service agents who saw him struck from the rear, they actually described, the boss was hit. I believe one of them even said low in the back. Excuse me, I've got some allergy problems today.
You're good.
Right?
I want to. I don't know if you interviewed Arlen Specter, but there's a guy, Tom O'Neill. He wrote a book called Chaos about the Manson murders and exposed kind of the truth behind Bugliosi, where it turns out he committed perjury during the Manson trials. He put a prosecutor on the defendant's side and he basically sabotaged the whole thing. So they never even
Not surprising.
But when he writes for The Intercept, and Intercept's a very respected newspaper. So, well, he wrote a book about the Manson murders, and it happened to be Joyanne West, who worked for MK Ultra, was the same psychiatrist who administered a flu shot to Jack Ruby before he started going nuts, which is interesting in its own. But he started looking into the JFK case, and he had called Arlen Specter and told Arlen Specter, because Arlen Specter publicly made it, that if anybody has any criticisms or anything and new evidence that comes out refuting his original statement on this single bullet theory, that he would be open to listening to them. And he gives him a call, says, "I have these new documentation." This is before his book comes out. And he says, "I have this new documentation. I want to show it to you." He got his secretary. I think it was not even like 10 minutes later after he hung up the phone, Arlen Specter calls. And at this time he's running for senator. And it was actually the first time in any of his campaign trails where it looked like he was going to lose. So he thought, hey, if this is new evidence about the single bullet theory, maybe it could help me win another term. Well, Tom O'Neill said he never got paranoid about it, but he just got some weird vibes because Arlen Specter was like, "Well, if you're in Philly at your parents' house, I stay down there on the weekends. Let's meet up and then you can show me the evidence so you don't have to send your documents, the only stuff you have that hasn't been published in your book yet. I'll come see this and I'll look at it." Well, Tom O'Neill cancels last minute. Arlen Specter calls him up and starts throwing this giant fit of like, why did you cancel? What's going on? And he's like, basically like, very, very pushy. Like, you need to show me these documents that you have. And, he ended up, I think something happened. I don't know if he passed away or something like that, but Tom O'Neill eventually published this and didn't show it to Arlen Specter. But I always thought that was really weird. Like, you got to think, you're this fresh law school kid that just gets assigned, and your whole career basically is built on a lie, the single bullet theory. That's your whole professional, that's everything. You're putting that on your resume. And someone shows evidence that can prove that you're not that, you're going to 100% want to know what that is, either be the one that releases it. So then you go, "I was wrong." And then you get to produce the new evidence, or you try and cover it up.
Yeah. Yeah, and as far as my dealings with Spectre, um, they were very disappointing. He was on Larry King one night when I was in college. Uh, I'm sure it was campaign time, and this guy calls in, and I'm trying to call in to Larry King as well. And that this guy gets through and he says, I'd really like to have a detailed explanation of how you arrived at the warrant or at the single bullet theory. And the guy and Spectre says, well, if you will send your, or you send your name and address and what you're interested in to my office, I will be happy to address that on a point by point basis. Now, this is right after Oklahoma City. This was probably June of 1995. I wrote a letter to Spectre that said, this gentleman whose name I had at the time because I was videotaping, the old VHS recorders, I was recording Larry King. And I said, this guy, Joe Blow, was going to get a point by point dissertation from you on the single bullet theory. If possible, I would really like to get a copy of that. And what I got was a form letter on domestic terrorism. That it had nothing to do with anything that was in my letter. It just was like, well, let's just send this kid something, anything, it's addressed to Bethany College, Lynchburg, Kansas. And so this kid will just take whatever we give him. He's not of any age to pull it, be able to pull anything off. So let's just throw him a bone. And I was a little disappointed in Mr. Spectre because Mr. Spectre actually does have Kansas ties. And I thought, well, maybe that'll be a bit of an in as well. He grew up in the town of Russell, Kansas, which is 2 hours from where I was going to college. And I thought, sometimes that some little connection, but no, I get a letter on, thank you for your concerns about domestic terrorism. Please be advised that we take this very seriously, and we're doing everything we can. And that's just like, what a waste of time.
Well, you got to thank all the people that gave you the time. I mean, it's got to feel great that they were willing to talk with you too, but it's also you're a younger generation. It's like how I managed to get the researchers on my show. They see a young kid interested in the assassination. A lot of people, I mean, especially my generation, has dropped off from just history in general. But I know probably about the research community. It's very, very tight knit, and a lot of people are kind of shots from both sides, depending on where you fall, if you agree or you disagree. But these people, they want to spread the message out there. But I feel like the people that just didn't want to give the time is they're probably tired of just rehashing it over and over again.
Exactly. When I called Charles Baxter, who was one of the Parkland physicians, in fact, he's responsible for Parkland's burn unit, which is one of the more respected burn units as far as research and coming up with new therapies and that kind of stuff. I called his house one night, and this would have been about the same time I interviewed Ron Jones the first time. It would have been summer of '92. And I get Mrs. Baxter. And Mrs. Baxter says, he's not going to be able to talk to you, even though when I sent my copy of the Warren Commission to be signed by Jim Carrico, because that was how I got my foot in the door. Please sign my book, but it came back with a Baxter signature on it as well. But she said, these Parkland doctors have just had too much. They've just, and I understand that. But I'd rather be told that than like Jenkins or like Salyer, who just suddenly, let's just go with the party line. That my phone calls will drop off if I just go, okay, there's the autopsy, and I agree with it, But yeah, definitely, I had a tremendous amount of good luck. And it isn't just even the Parkland people. I had the Bethesda people. I got Major General Edwin Walker on the phone.
Dude, tell me about him, please.
Walker.
That dude wrote a letter to himself, I guess under the name of somebody else, saying, while he's arrested, please don't give him any psychiatric appointments or any of this type of stuff, because we know about the KGB's uses of Russian lobotomies. Where I'm like, dude, if you know about Jack Ruby and his psychiatric appointment with Julian West, then you're like, yo, he knew about that MK Ultra stuff before we have documentation of when it started.
Oh yeah. Walker was, I don't know why I decided to call Walker.
You're doing what I do. You're reaching out to everyone. I like it.
I think I had a friend in college in Dallas who's still one of my closest friends.
Did you smell sulfur? Did you smell sulfur at any moment?
No. The phone book smelled like paper, fortunately. Otherwise, of course, I could probably still go home and try it. But Walker, I called, and I was just interested in why one of the photographs published by the Warren Commission had it's a picture of his house on, I forget the name of the street, but his house, and some of the pictures have a car tag. There's a car in the driveway, and some of them have the tag intact. Some of them, it's been like X-Acto knife bladed out of there. And I was curious about that. And I was also curious as to what his thoughts on Kennedy were, because I'd heard some rumblings. This was before I went to conferences. I went to conferences from about 96 to about 2003. And I got kind of fed up with some stuff and I stopped going. But I call Walker, and Walker is, he's 180 years old. I don't know how old he was. He's like 93 or something, but very grouchy, very intimidating. I was, I believe, 18 at that point. It was October, I believe, of 93. Now, as soon as I give that, someone's going to look up the day that he died and find out that I'm off by so many months or something. But
screw him, who cares?
As a ballpark, that's when it was. And he gets into the Oswald thing, and he insists. In fact, he sent me a form letter and he just jumped up and down on this on the phone, that Oswald was in custody by the Dallas Police Department the night of the Walker shooting in April of '63. And I said, well, that's very interesting. I've never heard that before. And I seriously doubt it, but I'm not going to tell him that. I'm not going to get into an argument with the guy. And besides that, like I said before, I wasn't there. Maybe he was.
I pulled up the document with Posner where it was a letter from Walker to J. Edgar Hoover or the Dallas police asking about Oswald was arrested after the shooting at my house, and he was released at like 12 p.m. or something like that. Please confirm if this is true or not. But then I found files on Bobby Kennedy that was investigating the Walker incident. Because if you really look at the examination, and they did an investigation of the Walker thing, it looked like it was for political gain. It didn't make sense. Why was Oswald shooting at a right-wing guy than shooting at a liberal like Kennedy? And his brother wanted to confirm what these rumors were. And the FBI said that Walker's a liar. He makes things up.
And that was kind of the thing, of course, when I'm talking to him, I kind of attribute this to probably some form of dementia. I mean, he was quite old. But he kept jumping up and down on this phrase that the law does not provide for prosecution and equal protection at the same time. And his thesis that he kept, what he kept insisting to me was that Oswald was in custody, and that this went clear to JFK, that the White House found out, that Oswald was in custody in Dallas at that moment for this shooting against Walker. And because Oswald was an intelligence asset of some nature, I don't believe he ever used the phrase CIA, but Walker's contention was that somebody at the White House proper, not a DOJ, not at the Pentagon, not anywhere else, somebody said, call Dallas and tell them to cut him loose. And that was, Walker just seemed absolutely obsessed with that. But again, he was very intimidating to me. So I was not eager to stay on the, this guy, I'm sure still had connections with people in the business. You don't do what he did and leave that business and sever all ties. It's like, if you're an intelligence agent, you've still got friends in intelligence. And now why did he intimidate me? Probably because I was 18 years old. I mean, if I would have interviewed him today, it would be very, very different. But his belief was that Oswald was arrested that night and that the White House had ordered him cleared. So that was my dealing with Mr. Walker.
The same way I treat Walker is the same way I treat Alex Jones. Like, I feel like he's known a little bit too much of like maybe some secret stuff that does go on. But then when you know that little bit, you start thinking everything is like that. And then you can't decipher what's real and then what's kind of fake. Like, he knew a lot of stuff where there's evidence on it today, the MK Ultra stuff that he was obviously writing letters about long before it was exposed in court hearings and everything. But if you look at all the political stuff he was doing, it's so like obviously for attention. It's the most bombastic type thing to get views or to get people to, support him in every type of way. I don't know. He's a strange character.
Definitely. And it's in a way kind of fortunate that the Alex Jones type was not around so much in 1963. Otherwise, I mean, we've already got muddied waters. Can you imagine how muddied the waters would be if we had a lot of people making these outrageous claims about Kennedy back in 63? There were a few of those outrageous claims made, but not very many. But now with the proliferation of talk radio, and was it some sheriff somewhere after a mass shooting called a vitriolic speech, we're fortunate that there were people like Mark Lane, people like Tank Thompson, Sylvia Marr, Mary Farrell. Mary Farrell was a bit of a mentor to me. These folks that actually took things responsibly, Penn Jones, for instance, Harold Weisberg. But Penn Jones, he says, well, I was introduced at a lecture, and I was introduced as an expert on the assassination. And the very first thing that I did was I got up there and I said, no, if somebody introduces themselves as an expert on the Kennedy assassination, run the other way, because there is so much to know that no one can know everything. People like Penn Jones were responsible enough to say, no one can know everything. So why don't we each kind of specialize in an area? And then we'll get together and compare notes, whereas you have, and I'm not picking on Mr. Jones, I'm just picking on the sort of mindset of, well, I know this, and this, so therefore I'm an expert on it, and I'm qualified to go on the radio or television or whatever it is and make this or that statement.
It's even difficult now. Even every researcher still follows that Penn Jones model of you pick one area, then you research the hell out of it. But every researcher, they just don't talk in a lot of these communities. There's certain niche groups and certain things because there's these small little details that just space out. Like I had someone explain like a Nixon angle, which is the hit team that went to Dallas. I believe it was the military industrial complex, but I've heard I've heard the a special team or the rogue elements of the CIA, and I've talked to a lot of people with different perspectives on it. But I mean, when I talk about like people say like, well, people conspiracy theorists like the deep state thing. I'm like, well, I mean, the deep state, it just depends on, you talk about intelligence, covert ops that happen. If we can talk about regime change with Castro, I mean, does it just limit to just being outside, or does it talk about maybe if and you look at the same eyes you looked at Castro as this mad person, and you just change that to someone who we know people weird suicide. The Clinton have a whole kill list, I'm pretty sure. Like there's weird suspicious stuff about that. And I'm just saying, like, to question things, and it's this idea that it won't happen in your own thing. And I think that's why the Kennedy case kind of attracts to a lot of people that are kind of skeptical about their government and have mistrust in this type of situation, because either something they've experienced in their life. But the Kennedy case, for me, when I look at it, I mean, there's a lot of things that don't make sense. And I stick to the articles and the documentation of Harold Weisberg and Malcolm Blunt. And I listen to other people and guests that I talk to on my show, but I'm looking at the documents, and the documents are saying the same thing, that we can't let there be conspiracy, or people are doubting that it's just this Oswald fellow. And I go, okay, then we have to get a real investigation into that. And that's why I put so much weight into the House Select Committee on Assassinations, because whether they ran out of funding and they stopped, their investigation to me is what the history book should also be teaching. If you need that government sanctioned investigation, we don't have one officially like that, as actually came with an answer. But they exposed a lot of things that I even showed Posner on the show, that Marina Oswald couldn't tell the difference between a rifle and a shotgun. Well, the Warren Commission said that she pointed out his rifle. Well, if you read the Warren Commission, it doesn't look like an investigation into the president. It looks like Oswald did it, and we're going to show you how, which is why it's important that people like you did these interviews in these moments, because my generation and younger generations out there, I'm glad we have recording tapes of things, but it, we're clueless. We don't know even where to start half the time.
Yeah, and a lot of people aren't into ballistics or firearms or stuff. I am. I was impressed that Gary Aguilar referenced Masad Ayub. You've got to be a pretty solid gun guy to even know who Masad Ayub is. But you've got a rifle with the wooden, the wooden bit that guards the barrel, and the wooden stock and all that stuff. Shotgun, your barrel is like this, or if you've got a double barrel or an over and under, and you got this thing up here that does this rather than a bolt. That should be, I mean, any layman on the street should be able to know the difference there. So if Marina can't nail that down, then how can we trust virtually? Does she know the difference between a rifle and a pistol? I mean, I know she took the pictures of Oswald on Neely Street, but
did you like my Gary Aguilar episode?
Oh, I loved it. Gary and I actually used to work together.
I know. I remember you telling me that, but I got some crap for that. They were like, "Why'd you got to talk so much?" I'm like, "Does everybody understand? This show's not an interview. It's conversation. I'm the questions I asked. I got to know. Like, I'm just hooked at this point. Like, I mean, he was very good with medical evidence. William Law was good. I mean, he told me things off air that I heard, like the ambulance at the second hospital at Bethesda went missing for like 45 minutes or something like that. Which is, what is that about?
That gets into the whole Lifton thing, and Mr. Lifton, I've met. In fact, I believe I was on a panel with Mr. Lifton in about 1997. I went to Dallas the first time, very excited to meet David Lifton, and I go up to him and I said, "Sir, you don't know me. My name is Brad Parker." He says, "I know exactly who you are." And he then starts in on me on, he has a problem with the way I've done a couple of things. and he's very vocal about it. And when he's done, I realized this man is absolutely correct. What it was I wasn't sending him copies of the articles that I was writing. And he says, you know, you're sending these articles to people that are trying to debunk what I'm doing, my research, and you don't have the courtesy to send it to me. And I said, sir, you wrote this tremendous book of what, 700-800 pages. Why would I presume to send you one of my little pitiful 3-page articles on what Gary or what Ron Jones told me? And he said, that's not the point. The point is you should have the courtesy. And he was absolutely correct. But when you come down to it, and Mr. Law has done a tremendous amount with the Seibert and O'Neill thing. You know, and I think he's still working on it. But you know, Best Evidence. I don't know if you've read Best Evidence. If you haven't, I would recommend it.
David Lifton said the same thing to me.
You know, he's got some stuff in that book that I don't necessarily agree with the conclusions that he reached, but he did some of the best research that was out there.
I watched his interviews. He wanted me to send him questions, and I told him, I was like, it's kind of not how my thing goes. I don't know what I'm going to ask you. It just kind of flows, and that's how we do it. There's no script here. We talk. He didn't really seem interested in that, which
and then this
fine.
is nice. I like your format.
I've probably lost no, I haven't. I send my number, never heard anything back. It's fine. I mean, I get it. There's a couple researchers I probably missed the opportunity on because of someone I had on. Either they don't like this researcher that I had on, or I had a bunch of people get mad at me for having Posner on. And I was like, you got to understand, from a younger generation looking into the assassination, I have to understand everything. The acoustical evidence, I have to understand. It doesn't matter. It does not matter if it's bullshit or anything like that. It doesn't mean that's where I'm going to side with it, but I have to understand the times. I had to look into George de Mohrenschildt. I had to look into people that specifically worked on communism. What is this fear of communism that I'm not understanding because we don't have that today? And it's just giving me the whole scope of everything. And you kind of start realizing, like, I mean, I'm going to listen to it. I'm going to talk to this person about it, but I also am going to go by documentation, what I know about the government manipulation. I mean, in institutions, universities, I've done an episode on, and Hollywood, I've done an episode on. So many episodes of just J. Edgar Hoover's administration, Nixon's administration, all these corrupted talons of the government involved into a lot of things. And I'm a patriot at heart, but you should know about a lot of these things as well too, because I mean, you have to be aware. I think when you start, you know, the media is probably our biggest issue today and our biggest example. I had Mal Hyman on here talk about, you know, the media's involvement in all this. I had to learn what Life magazine, like their power, and then Geraldo Rivera, what was his, and you just start learning. It's like, okay, I'm looking at a 50 or almost 60-year process of all the documentation that's come out. So I have that head start, but you guys have also researched this for 30, 40 years. So you already have your bias built up, in a sense, on comparative of who you're going to talk to and who you're not. I'm just lucky I don't know any of the back history drama. So I'm coming at it with, like, best thing I could do is give you my time. And so far, I mean, Posner was a nice guy to me. We talked a little bit longer off air. He's friends with David Lifton too. Which, I mean, I think a lot of it is for show. You know, you end up having a narrative or a side. His whole thing is the single bullet, the official conclusions, Oswald did it. And then everyone else that's on the opposite, like David Lifton. I mean, obviously people want to see them answer specific questions. Well, I like it when it's more conversation, because then you get to take them out of the 1,000 interviews they've already done saying the same thing over and over again. You get to ask them, like, what were you drinking when you wrote Best Evidence? Like, were you drinking a Pepsi? Were you drinking a Coke? And then if he says Coke, you said, hey, Oswald was on the second floor with a Coke. And then, you know, you do that. That's fun.
Yeah. And I did notice, you know, your shows are long enough, and this last week has been kind of crazy. I've only had a chance to watch just a handful of people, and I went with the people that I knew. I've had some dealings with Posner they weren't nasty, but they were a little curt. But I'm going to watch your episode. And I hold no bias against him. I mean, again, I think that most of these people, I'm not going to say all, but I think that most of these people truly believe what they're saying, whether you agree with them, whether you don't agree with them. They could be mistaken. I could be mistaken.
Well, I was going to ask you this about the Parkland doctors, and then I also want to talk about the Bethesda ones, but you got to think you're so involved into your research in your specific area, these doctors are, and then they see something that's pitched in a certain, I mean, I was reading the Warren Commission, and then I was like, damn it, am I on the wrong side of this? And you doubt yourself because you got to think they're going to show you every point that's going to fit their narrative. And that's what I kind of had issues with. And it's about our legal system too. Our legal system is set up in a way of it's a game. I'm going to defend my client, which means I'm going to make sure I don't look at the stuff against him. I'm only going to pick the things that would admonish him. Then you look at the prosecuting side, I'm going to look at everything that attacks you. And I think that's a terrible situation to be in because whether it's money or anything that gets involved, it's just now a contest of who's going to be the winner. And that shouldn't be like that when you're looking for the answer of the truth. And I kind of take that the same way with the researchers in the case in this matter. Your truth is going to be everything that you've researched into. So when you start having doubts, like a lot of these doctors, whether they reverse their opinion on their official statement if there was conspiracy, it's because after so much time, you're just broken at this point.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, Posner, I think, managed to talk a lot of doctors, maybe Ken Sawyer, for instance, talk them into reconsidering their opinion. I contend that any book you read on this, you should have some kind of problem with something. If you're not, you're just spoon feeding yourself. You're not actually kind of critically thinking about this. That there's stuff about my book. My book is unusual. I'm not sure that same book would come out today. I'm not entirely happy with it. I stand by everything that's in it, but the format of it, I don't necessarily care for. But I think that unless you are actually critically thinking about what you're reading, you're just, I hate to use the phrase because I heard an interview with one of the survivors of the Jonestown shooting. He said he didn't like the use of it, but you're just drinking the Kool-Aid if you're not actually thinking about what you're reading.
That's funny. You mentioned Jonestown. I try to get them on my show.
Oh, really? No, I heard an interview several years ago on NPR with one of the guys who survived the shooting at the airport. And he said that the phrase "drink the Kool-Aid" bothers him. And I've always remembered that. But in this particular instance, that's what I'm going to go with.
I think I know who you're talking about. He wrote a book on it. It's because it makes them seem like they're all like just lemmings following something, and it's not true. A lot of this was like family members and people just thought they were part of a community, and then it kind of went really bad.
Now you got a funny look on your face when I mentioned that I had not an issue, but I'm not entirely happy with my book.
Yeah.
The reason that came about was I'd written several articles. I started with the Jones one, which turned up at a COPA research convention, thanks to Gary Aguilar. But I had written several articles. I wrote an obituary for my friend, Dr. Charles Crenshaw. And then I wrote a paper which has never appeared in any journal called The Subjective Degree of Medical Certainty. And I get a call from Deborah Conway one day. And she says, "I'm getting a lot of calls for your articles." And I said, "Oh, okay, so Xerox them. I mean, I don't know what to tell you." She said, "Well, I'd like to put them together in an anthology." And I'm like, "Are you kidding? This thing's going to be this thick. No one's going to buy it. There's only a few of us involved in this far, namely myself and Vince Palomero." And Vince and I became fast friends in like 1996. So I've always felt that we've had a bit of a connection. But you know, we shared a lot of our research, and I said, no one's going to buy them. And she said, well, now again, remember, this is pre-internet day. And she said, well, you know, one thing is that we could use this as an opportunity to get your source material, the stuff that you really rely on, not the interviews necessarily, but stuff like White House transcript 1327C, which is the interview or the press conference that Malcolm Perry and who was the second one? It's been a while since I looked at it. But it's the, you know, that press conference, get that out there. Get some of the Warren Commission testimony that's not readily available. Now it's all online. In those days, you had to go to a university, which fortunately where I was at, we had the full Warren Commission testimony. You know, stuff from the HSCA, stuff from the AARB, and make that stuff available so that people can see where you're coming from. Now, to me, when the thing came out, it's this much of me and about this much filler of of material that now is readily available online. And I felt that it kind of made me look a little bit like I was.
You're reading reviews, dude. Stop reading reviews, man.
No, I'm not. I'm reviewing
You're
it
reading
myself.
reviews. Look, I don't like anything I do either, man. And I got 1,000-something episodes that I don't like. I don't listen to
I noticed
either.
your episodes are yeah, you've got a hell of a number of episodes. How long have you been doing this show?
4 years.
Damn.
I just started taking weekends off, but some weekends I still post. I used to do it every day. It's easy to talk to people. My format's pretty set up to where you don't need to, focus a whole lot. You just got to kind of be in the moment. Like I give you my full time and respect, and that's the best I can offer people is that. And I think that's it's good.
When you got a hold of me, and I've been contacted in the past by some people who have genuinely disturbed me. I got some news. I was getting anonymous postcards from this guy that claimed that David Rockefeller did it, and I needed to look into this, that, and the other.
Oh, I know who you're talking about, and we're not going to talk shit on air, but I know who it is.
Well, I may need to talk to you because I still don't know who that was. I just got a series of about 6 random postcards that I found very alarming. And I was on the phone to another gentleman one time who was very paranoid about the CIA monitoring things. And it happened to be that we were in a lightning storm and the phone went dead. And never heard from that guy again. I think he thought that the CIA had zapped our conversation. But when you well, first of all, I'm a big fan of the band, which you may be familiar with.
My whole life, dude, it never goes away.
I suddenly have Robbie Robertson in my inbox, and I'm a guitarist, and I'm like, oh, tell me he's going out on tour and he needs somebody as a rhythm guitarist,
We could start a band if you want. You don't know how much trouble that name has got me in, dude. When I reach out to a JFK researcher, I can name off a couple top hitters and they have not sent me anything back. And I just got a response after months. I reached out again and I was like, my name's Robbie, give them this little email thing. And they go, what's your last name? And I was like, look, it's real. Look me up. Just check my Spotify. My name's on there. And I give him my last name because it sounds like, I get it. It sounds like a fake name. I don't know.
No, I didn't. I know it was a real name. I just was like, oh, please tell me I've got a tour date, like. But no, I was still very flattered, even though it wasn't from the guitarist. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, I don't really know this individual. I glanced briefly at a couple of episodes and I got a hold of Vince Palomero. And I said, who is this guy? And he said, oh, you've got to do that show. This guy,
shit, really?
Yeah, he said he lets you talk. He's very respectful. It's very laid back. It's conversational. It's great. You've got to do this show. And he was right. I'm enjoying the hell out of this. I don't know how much time we have left, but certainly this has been a great experience, and I'm very flattered. You know, I was in. I assumed you probably heard of me through Vince, because in the Parkland to Bethesda book, not to brag, but I am in his book more than I'm in my book. I am named by name, I believe, 18 times. And I respect him tremendously. He's done a lot of great work. He's helped me out on a lot of stuff. And when he says, "You've got to do this," this is a very respectful young man, and he's doing a great job. That to me spoke volumes, and that was like, okay, I don't know how this is going to work. And if we've had some technical difficulties today, but we're making it work.
I respect the time all the researchers have given. I mean, you got to look at like, I could pick any other topic and obviously hot, trendy ones, because people say I could do this for clicks. And it's just like, that's not what this is. Honestly, if I could tell you that I just this week alone have stopped looking into documents because I kept sending them to David Denton, and he was like, chill, like, because I was sending him like 50 something documents, and he's like, Robbie, it's 1 a.m. And I'm like, dude. So he's got a couple documents he's actually going to mention at the conference. And I told him, you don't have to give me credit for it. Just say them. They're important stuff, I feel like, because I'm looking through that. And I'm not just looking through Malcolm Blunt's archives and Harold Weisberg's. I'm on the FBI site, the JFK site, and all this. I mean, it's consumed
is
a little bit
Blunt
of my life. Malcolm Blunt, yeah.
is Blunt no longer with us?
No, Blunt's, no, I was looking through his archives.
Oh, okay,
Did I
okay. I
say he
thought you meant
passed?
like,
No, he's still alive.
no. You said archives, and when you say archives, I think of like Weisberg or one of these folks that basically, instead of talking to them, Malcolm's great.
Yeah, much respect to Bart Camp. He sent me a Google Drive link of all the documents and stuff. I've had him on a couple of times too. Like I said, there's things I don't agree with. I don't agree with Prayer Man. I don't agree with a lot of stuff, but I'm just trying to understand every single thing, man, because everyone's got a lot of weight behind it. The only angle I have not tackled yet, and it will be upcoming, which is the mafia angle. Because I've heard people mention names, and I just need to individually look at biographies on these people and try and figure it out. But we've almost been talking 2 hours. I'm about to say we've almost been talking 2 hours. I want to give you time to promote your book, because I also want to talk to you off air for a little bit.
Okay. My book is called First on the Scene. It was published by JFK Lancer. Originally, it came out in a soft cover with a CD-ROM of the hardcover or of the book in a PDF format. But really, more than anything that I wrote, the reason to buy this disc, and I think it's like $12.50 or something, is that on that disc it's a video of me introducing Dr. Ron Jones in Dallas, and then a talk by Ron Jones, which runs about an hour and a half. And that talk by Ron Jones is worth the $12.50. Never mind me. I believe I'm also available on Kindle. I saw the Kindle edition of this and was appalled, because stuff like these charts, they don't format correctly.
What were those charts?
These are okay. This is location of JFK's head wound according to witnesses at Parkland, compiled by Aguilar, Crenshaw, and I. President Kennedy's head wound at Bethesda, compiled by Aguilar and I. But you have these. It's names, and then an area of the head, and then an X that goes with where they are. But a friend of mine bought the Kindle version, and I was just really embarrassed by the way that was formatted. But I didn't even know it was on Kindle.
If you were going to write a second book, would you write a second book?
I've thought about that. I would like to do something that's more narrative than, because my book is, here's what Ron Jones said, here's what Paul Peters said, here's what Dr. Crenshaw said, here's what I would like to do, maybe more of a thing of, this is how it started, like Lifton did. Lifton with Best Evidence starts out with in 1965, I called Ike Alkins, and he does all this stuff, and something more like that would possibly be it. But I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But that's, if you just Google, and there are several Brad Parkers. One of them writes sex books. But if you Google Brad J. Parker, JFK, or you go to the JFK Lancer website, John Kellen's, if John Kellen's stuff is archived, I used to write a lot for his Fair Play website. That would get you my material. And it's jfklancer.com is where you can get that CD-ROM.
You're welcome anytime on this show. Any panels I do, I'd like to try and plan another one out there. And we could talk off air about that as well too. But I appreciate the work that you've done. I had Josh Keelan on here, or Klein, I think his last name is. That was probably the last interview he'll ever do on this subject. It's not that the interview was bad. It was just, he said to me, I haven't done this in years, and I haven't even talked about it.
Neither have I.
Yeah. And then after I posted his episode, he sold all of his Vincent Salandria's documents, gave it to the archives of the college down there, and he no longer has them anymore. And he was like, this is it. I'm wiping my hands with this.
Who are you talking about?
Josh Keelan?
You mean John Kellen?
John, yeah, I said his name wrong again. John, I'm sorry if you're listening to this. I really am. You were a great person to talk with.
John's a great guy. I really hope John's a guy with a lot of interest.
He's a good musician.
He is. And we used to run around Dallas together because I would drive down there and he would fly in. So I'd be his ride from the conference to Dealey Plaza to Copa to back to Lancer because we used to bounce around according to who the speaker was at what conference. And a couple of times I was his ride, but no, I knew he was knee deep in the Salandria thing. I certainly hope that that's not the case.
Yeah. When he was on here, he said he'd been out of it for a while. And then I saw a picture of him put up the documents, giving it to the library, which is, it's good for anybody that wants to go to the library and access those as well too. It just sucks, man.
Who did he give those to?
Wherever he lives, there's a college right by him where he did a lot of his research.
Yeah, he lives in a major city in Colorado.
So I don't know what the college is called. I could probably end up finding out which one it is, but
because I've got this question of what I'm going to do with my stuff.
Send it to me.
That was actually suggested to me a couple of days ago by a friend. I said, I'm doing this podcast. And the guy says, this guy that's been a friend of mine since I was like 5 years old. He says, well, you may have someone to send you documents to because you may have some kind of kindred spirit there. And
wait, who is it? Who is it?
No, it's just a family friend of mine.
Okay.
No, this is a family friend of mine, but I've been worried about, I'm at the age, I had to do CPR on my mother. And since then I've kind of, I'm at that age sort of questioning your own mortality and stuff. And you think, geez, I don't have a wife or kids. So if something were to happen to me tomorrow, someone's going to come in and just chuck this stuff. And I need to figure out where things are going, but that has been suggested. That's funny that you mentioned that. And who knows? It may happen.
I'll put them all online for everyone to be able to access, unless it's private stuff that you didn't want. But I had Stephen Kinzer on here who wrote Poisoner in Chief about the MK Ultra and Sidney Gottlieb, who ran the whole thing. And he goes, I had to go to people's houses and they just had this in their garage. And it's like, this is the MK Ultra documents that we need to expose this, and just sitting in some person's garage. And it's like, oh my God, thank God people are putting this stuff online, because you got to think, with all the stuff we do have online, what about all the stuff we don't?
Exactly. How much stuff is disappearing because somebody's garage got water in it, or some mouse got in there and ate some memo from the CIA to the Army or something, But no, you'd mentioned wrapping up and chatting off air, and I don't mean to hold that up, but no, certainly thank you very, very much for the invitation. I've enjoyed this immensely. And I will say to anybody listening, if you're contacted by this young man, go ahead and do the show with unhesitatingly say that.
Brad, you're welcome back anytime, man. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. You can find Brad's links in the description below. See you on the next episode.